The dense jungle hummed with life as the evening light began to fade into twilight. The air was thick with the scent of earth and foliage, punctuated by the occasional call of unseen creatures. Towering trees stretched skyward, their leafy canopies intertwined to form a vast, natural cathedral that let only slivers of golden sunlight filter through. It was a scene of untouched beauty, but tonight, something unnatural shimmered deep within the heart of this wild expanse. Sarah adjusted the straps on her backpack and squinted through the dense vegetation. She had spent the past decade leading expeditions into uncharted territories, but this particular mission felt different. Unsettling. The reports of strange lights seen from satellite imagery had piqued the interest of her team, and after weeks of grueling travel, they were finally close. Behind her, the team followed cautiously. Jack, the engineer and self-proclaimed skeptic, muttered under his breath as he fiddled with a handheld scanner. "Whatever we're chasing, I hope it's worth it," he said, his tone laced with doubt. Elena, the team's botanist, paused to examine a cluster of glowing fungi clinging to a nearby tree. "Worth it? Jack, this place is already a treasure trove. Look at this biodiversity." Her voice carried an undercurrent of awe. Marcus, the rugged tracker who had been hired for his knowledge of the jungle, brought up the rear. He moved with the silent confidence of someone who belonged here. "Stay sharp," he said quietly, his machete slicing cleanly through a curtain of vines. "The jungle doesn't like intruders." They reached the edge of a vast clearing. Sarah held up a hand, signaling the group to stop. Before them lay the source of the lights, an orb, suspended several feet above the ground and glowing faintly in the encroaching darkness. Its surface shimmered with colors that seemed to shift with every blink, like liquid metal infused with starlight. "Whoa," Jack breathed, his earlier skepticism momentarily forgotten. He raised his scanner, its screen lighting up with erratic readings. "That's definitely not natural." The orb was surrounded by alien plants unlike anything Sarah had ever seen. Their tendrils glowed faintly, pulsing in time with the orb's light, as if drawn to its energy. The ground was littered with fragments of an unknown material, jagged pieces that reflected the orb's glow. "What is it?" Elena asked, stepping closer. Her voice was barely above a whisper, as if speaking too loudly might break the spell of the moment. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, her eyes fixed on the orb. She could feel its presence, not just see it, but feel it, like a low hum resonating deep in her chest. Jack crouched and carefully picked up one of the fragments from the ground. "This looks like some kind of metal, but it's warm, almost alive." He pocketed the piece, ignoring Sarah's sharp glance. "Let's not disturb anything yet," Sarah said firmly. She stepped forward, her boots crunching softly against the jungle floor. "We need to document this first. Elena, start with the plants. Jack, see if you can get a more detailed scan." As the team began their work, Marcus stood at the edge of the clearing, his eyes scanning the tree line. The jungle had gone unnervingly quiet, and he didn't like it. He tightened his grip on his machete. "Something's wrong," he muttered. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, the orb's glow intensified. The clearing was suddenly bathed in light, the colors shifting rapidly from blue to gold to a deep, otherworldly violet. The ground trembled faintly beneath their feet. "Back up," Sarah shouted, her instincts kicking in. She pulled Elena away from the orb as Jack scrambled to his feet. The light from the orb projected outward, forming intricate patterns in the air. Symbols and shapes that seemed almost alive danced around them, casting eerie shadows on the trees. It was beautiful and terrifying all at once. "What the hell is it doing?" Jack yelled, shielding his eyes. The answer came in the form of movement. From the shadows of the jungle, figures began to emerge. They were tall and slender, their forms shimmering as if made of liquid light. Their skin, translucent and faintly glowing, was marked with patterns that pulsed in rhythm with the orb. "Aliens," Elena whispered, her voice trembling. The figures moved with an eerie grace, their glowing eyes fixed on the humans. They did not speak, but the light patterns on their skin shifted, as if communicating silently among themselves. One of them stepped forward, raising a hand in what appeared to be a gesture of greeting or warning. Sarah raised her hand slowly, trying to convey that they meant no harm. "We're not here to fight," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The alien closest to her tilted its head, as if considering her words. Its body emitted a soft hum, and the patterns on its skin changed to a soothing green. "I think it's trying to communicate," Elena said, her voice filled with awe and fear. Before they could attempt to respond, a sudden rustling in the jungle broke the tense silence. The aliens' patterns shifted to an alarming red, and their postures became defensive. Marcus turned toward the noise, his machete raised. From the underbrush, more figures emerged, not aliens but human. They were armed and wore tactical gear, their faces hidden behind helmets. The leader, a grizzled man with a scar running down his cheek, stepped forward and leveled his weapon at the aliens. "This site is under our jurisdiction," the man growled. "Stand down." Sarah's heart sank. "Who are you? What are you doing here?" "None of your concern," he snapped. He waved a hand, and his team fanned out, surrounding the clearing. "You've seen enough. Time for you to leave." The aliens reacted instantly. Their glowing patterns became chaotic, and the orb pulsed dangerously, its light casting erratic shadows across the clearing. The air crackled with tension. "Don't do this," Sarah pleaded. "You don't know what you're dealing with." The man ignored her, barking orders to his team. Weapons were raised, and the jungle seemed to hold its breath. The tension in the clearing was palpable as the air thickened with anticipation. Sarah stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The aliens' glowing patterns were now a chaotic blend of crimson and deep orange, a stark contrast to their earlier soothing hues. The armed intruders had formed a perimeter, their weapons trained on both the alien figures and the orb that pulsed ominously at the center of the scene. The lead soldier, the scarred man who had issued the ultimatum, raised his voice. "This is your last warning. Stand down, or we will take action." Sarah turned her gaze to the aliens, who stood motionless yet poised. Their forms shimmered with an ethereal light that made them seem both fragile and indestructible. She could see the tension in their stances, a silent resolve emanating from their glowing eyes. "Wait," she shouted, stepping forward, her hands raised in a desperate gesture of peace. "You don't understand what's happening here. They're not attacking us. They're protecting something." The scarred man turned his glare on her, his face hard and unyielding. "Stay out of this, lady. This is a military operation now. These things are a threat. They haven't harmed us." Sarah countered. Her voice carried over the jungle's eerie silence. "You're the ones escalating this." The man snorted, his finger tightening on the trigger of his rifle. "They're an unknown entity. That makes them dangerous." Before anyone could respond, the orb's glow intensified, flooding the clearing with a blinding light. The pulse reverberated through the ground, a deep, resonant hum that felt as if the very air was alive. The alien figures responded immediately, their patterns shifting into something more structured, almost like a language etched in light. Elena gasped. "They're communicating with the orb." The soldiers reacted with panic. Several shouted orders, their voices overlapping in a chaotic din. One of them, a younger man with a trembling hand, accidentally discharged his weapon. The gunshot echoed through the clearing like a thunderclap. The effect was instantaneous. The aliens moved with a speed and fluidity that defied logic, their glowing forms blurring as they repositioned themselves around the orb. A translucent barrier of light sprang up between them and the soldiers, shimmering with intricate patterns that rippled like water. The jungle itself seemed to respond. The bioluminescent plants around the clearing flared brightly, casting eerie shadows on the ground. "Hold your fires," Sarah screamed, but her voice was drowned out by the chaos. The soldiers opened fire. Bullets zipped through the air, some ricocheting off the light barrier, others embedding themselves harmlessly in the dense foliage. The aliens did not retaliate with weapons. Instead, their glowing patterns shifted into rapid pulses, sending waves of energy that disrupted the soldiers' formation. Weapons were ripped from their hands as if by an invisible force, and several soldiers were thrown backward, their bodies landing with heavy thuds. "Stop!" Sarah yelled again, her voice breaking with desperation. "You're only making it worse." The scarred leader turned to her, his face contorted with rage. "This is your fault. You should have stayed out of this." Marcus, who had been observing silently from the edge of the clearing, finally sprang into action. With the precision of someone well-versed in jungle survival, he disarmed one of the soldiers and pinned him to the ground. "Call them off," he growled, his voice low and dangerous. "Marcus, don't," Sarah began, but her words were cut off by another pulse from the orb. This time, the energy wave was different. It wasn't aggressive, it was searching. The pulse washed over everyone in the clearing, human and alien alike. For a moment, Sarah felt as though her mind was being gently probed, like tendrils of light weaving through her thoughts. It wasn't invasive, it was curious, as though the orb itself was trying to understand them. "Do you feel that?" Elena whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Sarah nodded. It's alive." The scarred leader, however, was unmoved. "I don't care what it is. We're securing this site." Before he could give another order, the largest of the alien figures stepped forward. Its glowing eyes fixed on Sarah, and its patterns shifted to a soft blue, calming and deliberate. Slowly, it raised one elongated hand, pointing to her, then to the orb. Sarah's breath caught. "It wants me to approach." "That's insane," Jack shouted. "We don't know what it'll do to you." But Sarah's instincts told her otherwise. She took a cautious step forward, ignoring the protests of her team and the threats from the soldiers. The alien watched her closely, its glowing patterns slowing to a rhythmic pulse that matched the orb. As she crossed the invisible boundary, the jungle seemed to hold its breath. The light from the orb enveloped her, warm and soothing, like a gentle embrace. She felt an overwhelming sense of connection, not just to the aliens or the jungle, but to something far greater, something ancient and universal. Images flashed in her mind, a starship descending through the jungle canopy, the orb being placed as a beacon, the aliens standing guard over centuries as the jungle grew around them. They were not invaders, they were caretakers, and the orb was a relic of their civilization, a key to something she couldn't yet comprehend. Tears welled in her eyes as she turned to face the others. "They're not here to harm us. They've been protecting this place for generations." The scarred leader scoffed. "You expect us to believe that? This could all be some kind of trick." "It's not," Sarah insisted, her voice firm. "They're not the threat. We are." The alien extended its hand toward her, palm open. She hesitated only for a moment before placing her hand in its. A surge of energy passed through her, filling her with a profound sense of unity. The orb pulsed again, and this time, the light spread outward, washing over the entire clearing. The soldiers, now disarmed and disoriented, froze. The jungle seemed to come alive, its bioluminescent plants glowing brighter than ever. The alien figures lowered their guard, their patterns shifting to a serene green. Sarah turned to the scarred leader. "You need to stand down. If you don't, you'll destroy something you don't even understand." The man hesitated, his eyes darting between her, the aliens, and his subdued team. Finally, with a frustrated growl, he signaled for his men to fall back. "This isn't over," he spat, before retreating into the jungle with his team. As the tension eased, the alien released Sarah's hand and stepped back. The orb dimmed slightly, its pulsing rhythm returning to a steady, calming beat. The jungle around them seemed to sigh in relief. Elena stepped forward cautiously. "What happens now?" Sarah glanced at the alien, then at the orb. "We leave them in peace. They're not our enemies, they're our allies." Marcus nodded, his expression thoughtful. "Let's just hope others see it that way." The group lingered for a moment longer, watching as the aliens resumed their silent vigil around the orb. The jungle, alive with light and mystery, seemed to envelop them in its protective embrace. As they turned to leave, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The orb's secrets, and the beings who guarded it, held the key to something far greater than any of them could imagine. The jungle was eerily silent as Sarah and her team cautiously made their way back to the clearing. The ground beneath their feet was soft and damp, the air thick with the scent of wet earth and vegetation. The only sounds were the occasional rustle of leaves and the faint chirping of unseen creatures, yet the absence of the usual cacophony of jungle life set everyone on edge. Something was wrong. Sarah glanced back at her companions, Elena, Marcus, and Jack. They moved with quiet determination, their faces etched with worry. Marcus carried his rifle at the ready, though his expression betrayed a growing unease. Elena clutched her field journal, her knuckles white against the leather cover. Jack, ever the skeptic, muttered under his breath about the absurdity of their situation. "We're close," Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible. She pushed a low-hanging vine aside, revealing the faint glow of the clearing ahead. The blue light of the orb cast long shadows that danced across the foliage, an ethereal beacon in the dense jungle. As they stepped into the clearing, the scene before them stopped them in their tracks. The alien guardians stood in a loose circle around the orb, their luminous patterns shifting in a slow, deliberate rhythm. Their movements were graceful, almost ceremonial, as if they were performing some ancient ritual. But it was the sight beyond the aliens that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. The mercenary squad was back. They were positioned at the edge of the clearing, partially concealed by the underbrush. Unlike their first encounter, they were no longer hesitating. Their leader, the scarred man who had disregarded all warnings earlier, stood at the forefront, barking orders. Behind him, a bulky, tripod-mounted weapon hummed ominously, its barrel glowing with a dangerous red light. "They've brought heavy artillery," Marcus muttered, his grip tightening on his rifle. "We need to stop them before they do something irreversible," Sarah said, her voice firm but trembling. Elena stepped forward, her gaze fixed on the aliens. "They know we're here. Look at them." Indeed, the aliens had turned their attention to Sarah's group. Their glowing patterns shifted, becoming more intricate, as if they were assessing the situation. One of the taller guardians stepped forward, its eyes locking with Sarah's. The soft green glow emanating from its gaze was calming, a stark contrast to the chaos that loomed on the other side of the clearing. "They trust you," Elena whispered. Sarah nodded, swallowing hard. She stepped toward the guardian, her hands raised in a gesture of peace. "We need to act quickly," she said, her voice steady despite the pounding in her chest. "They're going to attack." The alien tilted its head, the patterns on its body shifting to a sharp, angular design. It raised a hand and pointed toward the mercenaries. Then, to Sarah's surprise, it pointed at the orb and finally back at her. The meaning was clear. The orb needed protection, and the humans were part of that effort. "They want us to help," Sarah said, turning back to her group. "But we need to approach this carefully. We can't escalate the situation." Jack scoffed. "Carefully? They've got a freaking cannon pointed at us. What exactly do you suggest?" "Strategy," Marcus interjected. "We have to neutralize that weapon without provoking a full-on firefight." Before anyone could respond, a low hum filled the air. The mercenaries were powering up their weapon. The orb's glow intensified, as if reacting to the threat. The Guardians' patterns turned a fiery orange, and they shifted into defensive positions around the orb. "We're out of time," Sarah said. "Marcus, can you create a distraction?" Marcus nodded grimly. "Give me 2 minutes." He disappeared into the jungle, moving with the stealth of someone who had spent a lifetime navigating treacherous terrain. Sarah turned to Elena and Jack. "We need to get closer to the mercenaries. If we can cut off their power source, we can disable the cannon." "And then what?" Jack asked, his voice tinged with frustration. "We're still outnumbered and outgunned. Trust me," Sarah said. "The aliens won't let this escalate if we show we're here to protect the orb." Jack hesitated, but eventually nodded.
"Fine.
"Lead the way." The three of them moved cautiously along the perimeter of the clearing, keeping low and using the dense foliage as cover. The mercenaries were focused on their weapon, their attention split between the aliens, and their leaders barked commands. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the jungle. Marcus had succeeded in creating a distraction, a dead tree crashing down near the mercenaries' position. The noise sent the soldiers into a frenzy, several of them spinning toward the sound with weapons raised.
Now,
Sarah hissed. She, Elena, and Jack rushed forward, closing the distance between themselves and the cannon. Sarah's heart raced as they reached the weapon's power source, a portable generator humming with energy. She motioned for Jack to disable it, but before he could move, a shout rang out. "They're here," one of the mercenaries yelled. Chaos erupted. Gunfire tore through the air as the mercenaries opened fire. The Guardians reacted instantly, sending out waves of energy that disrupted the soldiers' aim. The bioluminescent plants around the clearing flared brightly, their light disorienting the attackers. Sarah and Jack worked frantically on the generator while Elena provided cover, using a small mirror to reflect the moonlight and distract the mercenaries. The generator sparked as Jack yanked a cable free, and the cannon powered down with a sputtering whine. "We did it!" Jack shouted. But their victory was short-lived. The scarred leader emerged from the underbrush, his rifle trained on Sarah. "Step away," he growled.
Now.
Sarah froze, her mind racing. The Guardians stood motionless, their glowing patterns turning a deep, ominous red. The orb pulsed erratically, its light casting unsettling shadows across the clearing. "You don't understand what you're dealing with," Sarah said, her voice steady despite the fear gripping her. "I understand enough," the leader sneered. "That thing is a weapon, and we're taking it." "It's not a weapon," Sarah said. "It's a beacon. It's calling for help." The leader's expression faltered, but his grip on the rifle remained firm. "I don't care. Step away, or I'll—" Before he could finish, one of the Guardians moved. It didn't attack. Instead, it placed itself between Sarah and the mercenary, its glowing patterns shifting to a radiant gold. The orb responded in kind, its light stabilizing and growing warmer. The leader hesitated, his eyes darting between the alien and Sarah. "What is this?" "It's trying to show you," Sarah said. "Please, just listen." The leader's grip on the rifle loosened, but the tension in the clearing remained. The Guardian extended a hand toward him, its movements slow and deliberate. For a moment, it seemed as though he might lower his weapon. But one of the mercenaries, panicked and disoriented, fired a shot. The bullet struck the Guardian's shoulder, ricocheting harmlessly off its crystalline skin. The Guardian didn't retaliate, but the orb flared brightly, sending out a wave of energy that knocked everyone off their feet. When Sarah scrambled to her knees, she saw the scarred leader lying unconscious, his rifle several feet away. The mercenaries were retreating, dragging their injured comrades with them. The Guardians remained still, their patterns returning to a calming blue. Sarah turned to her team, relief washing over her. "It's over. For now," Marcus said, emerging from the jungle. "But they'll be back." Sarah nodded. "Then we need to make sure this place is ready. Whatever happens next, we have to protect it." The Guardians watched as the humans regrouped, their glowing eyes filled with an unspoken understanding. The alliance had been forged, but the battle was far from over. The jungle was alive with tension as the explorers and the Guardians prepared for what they knew would be the final confrontation. The mercenaries had retreated, but their absence only amplified the unease. The silence of the jungle was unnatural, a heavy void that seemed to signal the calm before the storm. Sarah and her team worked tirelessly alongside the Guardians, the alien beings moving with a grace and efficiency that was almost hypnotic. The clearing had transformed into a fortress of nature and extraterrestrial ingenuity. Thick jungle vines, animated by the Guardians' energy, wove themselves into barriers. Bioluminescent plants glowed brighter, illuminating strategic points and casting an otherworldly glow over the area. The orb at the heart of the clearing pulsed steadily, its light a beacon of unity and resilience. "This is incredible," Elena murmured, watching as one of the Guardians manipulated a cluster of vines into a lattice-like structure. "It's like the jungle itself is alive and responding to them." "It is alive," Sarah said, her voice filled with awe. "They're connected to it in ways we can't even begin to understand." It's not just their technology, it's their bond with this place. Marcus checked his rifle, his expression grim. Let's hope it's enough. If the mercenaries come back with reinforcements, we'll need more than glowing plants and barriers. They'll come back, Jack said, pacing nearby. And when they do, they'll bring everything they've got. We're talking heavy artillery, maybe even air support. They're not going to give up on something this valuable. Sarah looked at the orb, its light reflecting in her eyes. We have to make sure they don't take it. If they succeed, it won't just be this jungle that suffers. It could affect the entire planet. The group fell silent, the weight of their mission settling over them. Each of them knew the stakes, and despite their fears, they were committed to seeing it through. Night fell quickly, the jungle cloaking itself in shadows. The only light came from the orb and the bioluminescent flora, their glow casting eerie patterns across the clearing. The guardians stood like sentinels, their forms shimmering in the dim light. Their patterns had shifted to a deep violet, a color Sarah had come to associate with heightened alertness. The first sign of the mercenaries' return was a low, mechanical hum that reverberated through the jungle. Sarah's heart sank as the sound grew louder, accompanied by the faint glow of searchlights cutting through the trees. "They're here," Marcus said, his voice low but steady. Sarah nodded. "Everyone to your positions. Remember, we're not just defending ourselves, we're defending them." The team took their places, their movements careful and deliberate. Marcus and Jack positioned themselves near the barriers, their weapons at the ready. Elena stayed close to the orb, her role to document and, if necessary, activate the fail-safes they had prepared. Sarah stood near the Guardians, her presence a bridge between the human and alien allies. The mercenaries emerged from the jungle in a calculated advance, their numbers bolstered and their equipment more formidable. They moved with precision, their formation tight, and their weapons trained on the clearing. At their center was the scarred leader, his expression cold and determined. "Last chance," he called out, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Hand over the orb, and we'll leave peacefully. Resist, and we'll take it by force." Sarah stepped forward, her heart pounding. "You don't understand what you're dealing with. This isn't a treasure to be taken, it's part of something much bigger. If you remove it, you could destabilize the entire ecosystem." The leader sneered. "Spare me the lecture. That thing is worth more than you can imagine, and we're not leaving without it." Before Sarah could respond, the Guardians moved. They stepped forward as one, their glowing patterns shifting to a fiery orange. The orb responded in kind, its light intensifying until it bathed the clearing in a radiant glow. The jungle seemed to hold its breath, the air crackling with energy. The leader raised his hand, signaling his squad. "Take them down." Gunfire erupted, shattering the tense silence. The Guardians reacted instantly, erecting barriers of light that absorbed the bullets. Vines lashed out like living whips, ensnaring weapons and disarming the attackers. The bioluminescent plants emitted bursts of light, disorienting the mercenaries. Marcus and Jack provided cover fire, their shots precise and deliberate. Elena worked quickly, using a handheld device to synchronize the orb's energy with the Guardians' defenses. Sarah stayed near the front, her focus split between coordinating her team and maintaining the fragile alliance with the aliens. The battle was chaotic, the clearing a blur of light and movement. Despite their advanced weaponry, the mercenaries struggled to gain the upper hand. The jungle itself seemed to fight back, its natural defenses amplified by the Guardians' influence. But the mercenaries were relentless. A deafening explosion rocked the clearing as they deployed a rocket launcher, the blast tearing through one of the barriers. The shockwave knocked Sarah off her feet, and for a moment, all she could hear was the ringing in her ears. When she regained her bearings, she saw one of the Guardians lying motionless, its patterns dimming. The sight filled her with a surge of determination. She scrambled to her feet and shouted, "We can't let them break through." The scarred leader advanced toward the orb, his rifle trained on the remaining Guardians. "This is your last chance," he said, his voice filled with menace. "Stand down, or I'll destroy everything." Before he could fire, a brilliant light erupted from the orb. The energy wave swept through the clearing, freezing everyone in their tracks. The Guardians rose to their full height, their patterns now a dazzling gold. They moved with a newfound purpose, their actions coordinated and precise. The leader's expression shifted from confidence to fear as the Guardians closed in. He raised his weapon, but it was too late. One of the Guardians extended a hand, and the rifle was pulled from his grasp by an unseen force. The vines wrapped around his arms, immobilizing him. The remaining mercenaries hesitated, their resolve faltering. Some dropped their weapons and fled into the jungle, while others stood frozen, unsure of what to do. The Guardians didn't pursue them. Instead, they focused on securing the clearing and ensuring the orb's safety. Sarah approached the scarred leader, her gaze steady. "It's over. You've lost." He glared at her, his defiance unwavering. "You don't understand what you're protecting. That thing doesn't belong here." "It belongs to them," Sarah said, gesturing to the Guardians. "And it's part of this jungle now. You've seen what happens when you try to take it. You're endangering everyone." The leader didn't respond, his expression dark. The vines tightened around him, ensuring he couldn't escape. The orb's light began to dim, returning to its steady, rhythmic pulse. The jungle seemed to exhale, the tension dissipating as the battle came to an end. The Guardians lowered their defenses, their patterns shifting to a calming blue. Sarah turned to her team, her exhaustion evident. "We did it." Marcus nodded, his rifle slung over his shoulder.
"For now.
But we need to make sure this place stays protected." Elena approached the orb, her eyes filled with wonder. "It's incredible. It's like it knew exactly what to do." "It did," Sarah said. "It's not just an object, it's a living part of this world. And it's our responsibility to protect it." As dawn broke over the jungle, the clearing was bathed in the soft light of a new day. The Guardians stood watch, their presence a reminder of the bond that had been forged between humanity and the extraterrestrial protectors. The battle was over, but Sarah knew their journey was far from complete. The jungle's celestial secret was safe for now, but its true significance had only begun to reveal itself.